Hi there, I'm Zach Kircher, and you're watching Kircher Talks Entertainment. Alright, it has been a couple of months since Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning released in theaters, and as a big fan of this series, I've really wanted to dedicate my love for the series to some kind of YouTube video one way or another. But that idea didn't really come into fruition until I realized that I didn't want to just do a normal review of The Final Reckoning or do a ranking of the series for that matter. I want to do something a little bit more unique and a little bit more interesting. And so I put it to a vote on my community page in which I asked you guys if you would rather see me rank all 8 movies or if you wanted me to do a tier list of all of the action scenes, and you voted accordingly. So, the video that I have for you today is as a result of that poll. So, we've got a tier list of all of the action scenes from Mission Impossible. Now, to explain how I'm ranking these before we get into it, I'm not going with the typical S, A, B, C, D sort of scale that most people use in their tier lists. Like the tier list that I did for my childhood movies, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. See, at the very bottom we have really? That's it? Meaning that that's an action scene that it doesn't really amount to much, one that's not really going to stick in my memory, and one that's just kind of silly. Then we have I've seen better, which in other action movies it might actually be pretty good, but for Mission Impossible, one of the most elevated and one of the most entertaining and skillfully made action movie franchises out in Hollywood, what we're being served up was probably done better elsewhere, or at least just as competently in other movies. And then we have Pretty Cool, which is an action scene that's pretty solid. You know, it's not the most amazing thing in the world, but it does its job, and certainly is suitable for the Mission Impossible series. And then we have That Was Awesome. That is a sequence that is just shy of greatness for me, but is still one that I look forward to watching every single time I watch any single one of these movies. And then you have A Truly Impossible Mission. These are the sequences that you watch Mission Impossible for. Like the things that they market these movies around, the sequences where you just look at it and you're like, how in the world do they do that? These kind of sequences are the ones that make your butt clench, that make you, chatter your teeth, whatever it is. Just they are the cream of the crop when it comes to action scenes, bar none. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a different action movie that does, these kind of things better. And without further ado, let's just get right into it. I ordered all of these sequences in sequential order as well as chronological order, and so we're going to go through all of the major sequences in all 8 movies. And just know that I didn't pick literally every single action scene, or else we would have been here a lot longer. These are just like the ones that stood out to me the most when I was kind of reviewing everything in the series in my mind. Oh, and one more thing. If you've never watched any of the Mission Impossible movies, be warned, I am going to spoil the ever-living crap out of these movies, so consider this your warning before you, watch the rest. And we are going to start off with the original Mission Impossible from 1996. The first sequence in that movie is when Ethan Hunt's team is killed.
They're dead! They're all dead!
And obviously this sequence is iconic, and so I'm going to go ahead and put it in the That Was Awesome tier because it sets the movie off right on a great tone, with Brian De Palma sort of pulling more of a appropriately an espionage sort of tone with this movie, and something that's a little bit more Hitchcockian, a little bit more thrilling and suspenseful, turning things on its head and having Ethan be the only one who gets out of this sequence alive. It establishes the stakes right away. And also the deaths are all pretty brutal. I mean, you have Emilio Estevez's character who goes out in the elevator the way he does. Every single death hits just because it's surprising, it's shocking, and it really does show how desperate of a situation Ethan Hunt is thrown in right from the very beginning. It's one that I always look forward to seeing just because of how shocking and suspenseful it is, and it gets the movie off on a great note. And then next we have Langley. And yeah, I mean, this is top tier, easily. Like, truly impossible mission. I mean, a sequence like that, it's not necessarily that it's the most tricky stunt work that you've ever seen in a movie. It's just, it's perfectly executed. It's well filmed, it's funny, it establishes everything that you need to know very clearly as to how dangerous the sequence is going to be. Ethan has to be very careful to not sweat at all. They have to maintain the temperature in there. They can't make all these crazy sounds. No changes in pressure, nothing can touch the floor. And so all of these things established, it just makes everything all the more tense, with everything Ethan has to do with being quiet and stable and all that, as well as Jean Reno's character having to hold all of his weight and not cause any further problems, which is made all the funnier when you have that rat that starts crawling towards him and you're like, oh crap, what's going to happen? Yeah, that is definitely one of the single best sequences in the entire franchise, and there's a reason why it's stuck around in most people's minds, and why it ultimately came back in the final reckoning, or at least, it came full circle in that movie. Alright, up next we have the English Channel sequence, which is the finale to the original Mission Impossible, and for this one, I'm going to stick it in pretty cool. This is obviously the final confrontation between Ethan as well as Jim Phelps, who is, the original character from the TV show who went bad. And I think this is pretty cool enough. I mean, you have the great stunt where Ethan has to hold on to the high-speed bullet train in the English Channel while he's being chased by a helicopter. And the way that it all ends up is very fun and entertaining, as well as satisfying, just to see the bad guys get their comeuppance. So, a bog standard sequence, but in the hands of Brian De Palma, it really works. And now we get into Mission Impossible 2, which I think we can all agree is pretty much the only legitimately bad movie in this series. You could argue quality for the other movies in the series, but this one, I think most people would agree, just not good at all. And it is very evident of that with the opening sequence, the rock climbing sequence, when Ethan is having a quote-unquote holiday in what I would assume is southern Utah. And yeah, what else can I say? That sequence is just so silly and so dumb. Kind of silly and dumb in a so bad it's good kind of a way, but every single time that movie opens, I'm laughing, and not necessarily in a complimentary way, shall we say. There's not really much that happens in that movie that's really that exciting for a while until the biosite shootout. And even then, I've definitely seen better. Again, like the other sequences in that movie, it kind of plays up the silliness a little bit, with the way that John Woo filmed that movie. There's a lot of flashiness to it, and there's certainly a lot of just Guns Akimbo style stuff going on, and it's fine. I mean, honestly, the more I talk myself out of it, I'm just going to put it in really that's it. Just because it's not really that memorable of a sequence, and you're trying to get all of this emotional value out of Ethan trying to protect Tandy Newton's character. I forget her name, honestly, which is to say something about that movie too, but it tries to get emotional value out of that sequence by Ethan trying to protect her, and I just get nothing out of it. And it's not really that well filmed, it's just silly. At least in the end of Mission Impossible 2, that is certainly the most entertaining part of it, when it gets into that motorcycle chase, and yeah, I'll put it in pretty cool. It's dumb fun, but when it gets to that point, it's like, yeah, okay, this is the energy that this movie has been missing, especially when it gets to that final confrontation between Ethan and the main villain of that movie, when it gets so ridiculous to the point that it's just awesome to witness. It ends off on a good note, but not really enough to save that movie, in my opinion. And now we get to Mission Impossible 3, and the opener for that sequence, I think it's fine. That's probably the best I could say about it. It's on the higher level of the I've seen better tier. I do think it gets a lot of value in the sense that, that whole sequence is built around trying to save Kerry Russell's character, and it ends off in a pretty sad note with the fact that she ends up dying because of that micro explosive that's in her brain. It's something that comes out of left field and is totally unexpected in the moment, and it's brutal too.
Thank you.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
But the sequence that surrounds it, I'm just not a fan of how J.J. Abrams filmed it. Everyone always complains about J.J. Abrams doing his lens flare thing and a lot of shaky cam. And with this being his first movie, it's very, very evident in this sequence. And it's not really that visually appealing to look at. Thankfully, the next sequence in that movie, the next major set piece that is, which is the attack on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, I think that one's pretty good. It's certainly intense, and I think it has extra value in the sense that Ethan and his team have to try to protect random civilians that are caught in the crossfire on the bridge. And so it adds greater tension and greater stakes, and that it's not just about Ethan and his team trying to survive, but other people who are put in danger because of Davian living up on his promise to basically kill everyone that Ethan cares about, and all the collateral damage that surrounds that. So, good sequence for sure. After that, we have the Shanghai sequence where Ethan and his team are actually getting the rabbit's foot from, like I said, Shanghai. And I'll put this in I've seen better as well. It's kind of the start of the thing with Mission Impossible where you have this big stunt that the whole entire movie is built around. And it's cool, but I think a lot of it is taken down by what appears to be some pretty bad green screen. At least I would assume it's green screen. I mean, you have some sequences where you do have flyby shots in Shanghai itself, and there's some good stakes there, but it just doesn't hold up as well visually as I would like, and I think it could have used a lot more excitement from the music. Michael Giacchino's music just doesn't really do enough, and I normally love his scores, so definitely interesting there. But again, I think it ends off well with another solid enough finale where in Mission Impossible 3, Ethan is tasked with saving Julia, or I don't know if task is the right word, but Julia's put in danger, and also he has to get the rabbit's foot again from Davian, and I think the way that all ends up is very suspenseful and very entertaining, and also it provides some good emotional resonance for Ethan's story arc throughout the whole entire series, so good stuff. I like the way that Mission Impossible 3 ends. But now we're really getting into the good stuff. The first sequence in Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which is my second favorite movie in the series, starts off with Ethan somehow being in a Russian prison. And that does get explained, but, this sequence, I really enjoy it. I'm going to put it right up there next to the English channel, because something about Ghost Protocol is that with Brad Bird at the helm, he does a great job balancing some very well-executed action sequences, along with some very, very well-timed humor. That's all signaled very strongly with this very first sequence with the prison escape. Dean Martin's Ain't That a Kick in the Head in the background, which helps. And then just everything with the physical comedy, and then all of the reaction shots going back to Simon Pegg or Benji, I should say, watching all of this unfold. Yeah, very fun sequence, and I really enjoy the precedent that it sets by opening that movie that way. And then next, we have the Kremlin sequence. And that's my next entry in the That Was Awesome tier, because even though there's not really any major stunt work that occurs in this sequence, I think the thing that this does very well is it kind of goes in a direction that you would never think it would. This is probably one of the craziest things that's happened in these movies, in the sense that you have what is essentially the Russian equivalent of Buckingham Palace or the White House or whatever, and it's just completely bombed to smithereens. Obviously a very culturally significant thing going on there, but with the lead up to that, I think it's a very good sequence where Ethan and Benji have to work together, and there's that whole thing where they have the I don't want to call it a green screen projector, but that's kind of what it is. They have that thing that they're trying to use to move up and get the data tapes they're looking for, and they have to trick the hallway guard with it. That's always a lot of fun watching that sequence, but it also starts planting seeds for some things that happen later in the story too. So very great sequence, and where that ends off is a great way to kick off Act 2. Now, we don't get a major sequence for a little bit after that, but when we do, we get to the Burj Khalifa, which is another one of those absolute top-tier sequences from this series. When anyone thinks of a stunt from Mission Impossible, they think of that sequence where Tom Cruise, he really did climb up the Burj Khalifa. There's not much camera trickery that goes on there. He really was just climbing up that thing. I mean, he was certainly on suspension cables and whatnot, but an absolute crazy stunt. And that one has always stood in my mind because Ghost Protocol actually was the very first movie in this series that I ever saw. And when my brother took me to see it when I was, I think, 16 or something, we actually saw it in IMAX. And so the added suspense and the tension that came from seeing it on this enormous 80-foot tall screen with that square aspect ratio was absolutely crazy. But also the Burj Khalifa sequence earns extra points from me in the fact that, Ghost Protocol as a movie is very focused on the team, not just Ethan himself. And this whole sequence relies on the team doing everything perfectly, but all of these things keep malfunctioning and changing the way that they're trying to tackle it. With the adhesive gloves, those things start failing. The masks, they're not able to actually make the masks that they're trying to do, and so they have to make this last minute sort of, almost kind of comedic switching of roles in order to make it happen, and you have Benji there with serving tea and exchanging things. Very fun sequence, and watching Paula Patton kick Lea Seydoux out of a window, always, yeah, it's crazy. And then after that, we have, I'm just going to call it I'll Catch You, because, how else can you really refer to the sequence? This is towards the end of the movie when they're trying to infiltrate the mansion of this Indian media mogul who has access to media satellites that they need to use. And in this sequence, Brant, played by Jeremy Renner, has to jump into this computer shaft, and he's wearing this magnetic suit that'll make it so that he'll essentially be caught in his fall when he jumps down the shaft. And it's just a really funny sequence to watch, because Jeremy Renner pulls off that nervous anxiety very well before he jumps in there. Benji promising that'll catch him is just a nice kind of like running gag that goes into there. So
okay, you just breezed over something I think really important, the computer array part, where I just jump
and I catch you.
Yeah.
I mainly put it in here because of the humor, but it's just so well done on that aspect, and it's a fun stunt too. And then the movie ends off with the battle and oh, not really a battle, like a brawl in the parking structure. I'll put this in I've seen better, just because it is a decent way to end the movie, but I think out of all the sequences in Ghost Protocol, this is probably the one that is the least memorable. And that's just for the fact that, like, it's a standard, fisticuffs sort of fight, although it does end off in a really unique way in that the villain is so drawn to his ideals of nuclear warfare being like the way to reset humanity that he basically commits suicide in order to keep Ethan from accomplishing his goals. But Ethan, being the way he is, he gets into a car, drives off of it to get to the bottom of the parking structure, and then does his famous line,
"Mission accomplished."
That's almost enough to put it in the pretty cool tier for me, but otherwise, like, the way that it's executed, it's just doesn't stick in my mind all that much. And now we get into Rogue Nation, and so we're a little bit more than halfway through this tier list now. Even though the boarding the plane scene is like the stunt that they put on the posters, and then like the cover art for the Blu-ray or whatever it was, I hate to kind of undermine like the stunt that Tom Cruise did, because he really was holding on to that plane in that sequence, and I can't imagine how terrifying it would be to do that. But the stunt in and of itself, it's just kind of a stunt for stunt's sake. It doesn't really add much more to the story beyond just being a cool moment. And so, even though, like I said, the actual act of holding onto that plane is an act of superhuman strength on Tom Cruise's part, I don't know, beyond just the novelty of it, it doesn't really do much for the movie beyond that. But afterwards, the next major sequence is in the Opera House, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in a truly impossible mission, because that is one of those sequences that I look forward to the most when watching Rogue Nation, because of all the tiny pieces that come together to make this really entertaining and fun scene of suspense, in which it's actually paying homage to A Man Who Knew Too Much by Alfred Hitchcock, which I have a review on the channel for. Even with it being an homage to that movie, it does a very good job at establishing all of these different moving parts coming together to result in Ethan having a very fun fist fight with a goon above the opera that's being performed, and then all these different guys who are trying to take out the politician dude. Yeah, just a great sequence, and I think it is very fun in being able to continue the relationship that's struck between Ethan and Ilsa in that moment. So I always love that sequence, watching it, and I look forward to it every single time I put on Rogue Nation. After that, we have the underwater filtration, and I'll put that in That Was Awesome, because again, it was a stunt that Tom Cruise himself did, and it also is one where he broke the record for the longest time spent holding his breath underwater before Kate Winslet broke it for the production of Avatar: The Way of Water. If my memory serves me correctly, I think Tom Cruise held his breath for like 6 minutes or something like that filming the sequence. Aside from that achievement alone, I think the sequence does a great job at establishing a lot of moving parts again that show kind of like the things that are being stacked against Ethan Hunt in his mission objective that he's trying to accomplish, where the only way that he can help Benji steal this information that he's going after in Morocco is to go to this underwater computer grid, basically, and switch things out. And so the way that is established and kind of like what's at stake there and how it, again, in the Mission Impossible way, things go bad. Yeah, I think that makes for a very fun sequence for sure. And then after that, we have the car and motorcycle chases in Morocco. And I'll go ahead and put this at the top of the pretty cool tier, because even though I think I prefer some of the other chases in this series later on, this one is so strong just for the filmmaking alone, like especially in the motorcycle chase that happens, after the vehicle that Ethan and Benji was in crashes, and then, Benji and Luther and Brant have to be together and Ethan goes on his own. Yeah, very fun sequence that is, very, very heightened by its filmmaking, the music, and then just the commitment that Tom Cruise did to actually being on that motorcycle himself. And so, very, very entertaining. I always enjoy that one too. And then ending things off, we have the scene where Ethan and Ilsa, they have to team up together in order to save Benji, as well as capture Solomon Lane. And this one, I'll put it in I've seen better, just because even though you have that emotional resonance of Ethan trying to save his friend, and he has to play hardball with Solomon Lane in order to make it so that Benji survives, after that, like, Nothing that really happens after they save Benji, I just don't really think it's that exciting. I don't really have much to say other than that. It's just, I think out of all of the sequences in Rogue Nation, that's probably the one that I look forward to the least. I think the movie peaks at the Morocco stuff and then just sort of peters off after that. Not to say that it's bad, it's just, the other sequences are so great in Act 2 that once it gets to Act 3, it's more so just kind of wrapping things up, but not really scaling up the tension, if you will. So that's just how I see things. But now we get into Mission Impossible Fallout, which is my favorite in this franchise, and I think it's probably the favorite for most people. And just for the fact that, every single sequence in this movie is a banger, dude. And we start off with the Halo jump, which I'm going to put in the that was awesome tier. It's another one of those stunts that was kind of done for stunt's sake, but I do really appreciate that sequence. Tom Cruise really did do a Halo jump. There was someone who filmed him jumping out of a cargo plane like that. And then I appreciate that the sequence that follows after that, where you have John Lark and Ethan Hunt that are trying to Halo jump into Paris. Things go wrong there, and then the two of them have to work together. Well, Ethan mostly, in order to get down safely. It's very tense. It's very exciting. I think it does a great job at being able to help you really feel the tension of the moment, even though, yeah, I'm sure that would have been a well-coordinated stunt to ensure the safety of both of those actors. It feels unsafe while you're watching it, and so I think that definitely helps the intensity thereof. Shortly after that, we have the the famous bathroom brawl, which I'm going to put that in that was awesome as well. Out of all of the fist fighting sequences that happen in this franchise, this is probably the one that is the most memorable. The lack of music definitely helps to where you just hear these three men, Ethan, John, and that random Asian dude who are just going at it in this bathroom and completely destroying it in the act of trying to kill each other. Their grunts and their screams and their yells, as well as just the raw sound effects of all of them punching each other and all that. It's so satisfying. And then it just ends kind of a funny way where you expect one of them to kind of do a brutal kill against the Asian guy, but then Ilsa just comes in there and domes him. Very surprising ending to that sequence, but a very, very good one nonetheless. And then we have the vehicle chases in Mission Impossible Fallout, those being in Paris. And I'll put those in that was awesome as well. I think those edge out the ones in Morocco just because for these, they play a little bit more into Ethan Hunt as a character. They're motivated by Ethan trying to do the right thing, not just in the sense that, he's trying to complete his mission, but also to minimize casualties in doing so. You have that one scene before all of this starts where he's imagining committing these heinous acts against, the French police. And then everything that you see thereafter is him going against the plan that was outlined for him in order to make sure that he accomplishes his mission, but also doesn't compromise his morals. Yeah, these sequences are very fun on their own, just from a filmmaking standpoint and from stunt work, but yeah, for how much they contribute to the story too. And then we have the London foot chase, which I'll put that in pretty cool. Obviously, this sequence is famous for Tom Cruise himself having injured himself in that one moment when he jumps from one building to the other and then you see him hit his foot against the wall and then he sort of limps off. Yeah, he really did injure himself in that moment. It's one of those rare movie sequences where you actually see an actor injure himself. Tom Cruise, being the professional that he is, he just kind of played it off on camera and then it just continues going. But otherwise, I think this is just a fun sequence in and of itself. And for those of you who love to see Tom Cruise running a lot, it is definitely a Tom Cruise running scene, I'll say that much. And then for the finale of Fallout, the helicopter dogfight, as well as the ensuing fight against John and Ethan on the cliffside, that is what I watch movies for. That's honestly my favorite sequence in the entire franchise. Just for, how cool is that? It is just so cool. This helicopter dogfight in which they're flying through this canyon and then John is shooting up Ethan with this massive minigun. I have no real words to say other than that. It is peak cinema. Absolute cinema, if you will. That is why I watch movies. For how they execute that with the filmmaking thereof and the exciting music and everything, it's just awesome, dude. And now we're coming to the tail end of things here with this tier list where we have the opening sequence, well, not quite the opening sequence, but it's towards the beginning of Dead Reckoning. Benji and Luther are trying to disarm the nuke in I think is the Abu Dhabi airport. Yeah, I'll put that in the pretty cool tier. I always like a good sequence where Benji is in a situation where he's a very capable guy with computers as well as a good field agent, but I just like a good sequence where he's put in the moment where he has to make or break something. And what can I say? You know, the tension that comes from putting in these codes in order to stop a nuke from going off is just, it's good stuff. And then after that, we have the Rome chase. Yeah, I'll put this in That Was Awesome. Christopher McQuarrie just does such a great job with vehicle chases in these movies, but this one has the added value where Grace and Ethan, Grace being the new character in the movie at this point, they're handcuffed together. And so there's a little bit of added tension and humor from the fact that they have to sort of work together as well as against each other in this chase sequence. I think that just kind of adds that much more entertainment value to that sequence. And then we have the foot chases and the fist fights in Venice. This one I'll put in pretty cool. I will admit I'm a little biased because I really loved Ilsa as a character, and I was devastated that they killed her off in Dead Reckoning. I seriously thought she was the death was a fake out and that she would come back in the final reckoning, but no, she stayed dead. And so it's hard for me to watch it for that reason, but otherwise it's just another really well done sequence that uses a lot of extreme close-ups to great effect, as well as some good wide and medium shots for, you know, changing things up in the action sequences. So it's good, just I'm always sad by that, man. And then we have the motorcycle jump sequence, which is kind of like it's honestly like the boarding the plane sequence for me in Rogue Nation, where it's the one that they put on the poster and the one that they try to put in trailers. Again, it's a great stunt. Honestly, this is probably a horrible take, but I'm going to put it in really that's it. Just because while it is cool, like, you know, I can't deny how scared Tom Cruise might have been going into that stunt. It's just, I don't know, it was very underwhelming in the moment when it actually happened. It was really just kind of, I think we were mostly spoiled by the trailers with that one. And in the context of the movie, like, yeah, he needed to obviously do it in order to get on the Orient Express, which that's coming up in a second. But I don't know, man, just something to put in there for the trailers, and that's pretty much it. And they had to write the movie around it. That's at least how it feels to me. But after that, we have a very good sequence in the Orient Express. I'll put this near the top for pretty cool. As an Uncharted fan, especially like, you know, Uncharted 2, I think this sequence brought a lot of good memories from that game back to me as I was watching this, and for good reason. Like, you know, it's a very well executed finale where you have Ethan fighting against Gabriel on top of the train, as well as Grace trying to play the role of the White Widow with the mask and everything, as well as the train breaking apart at the end, and then Ethan and Grace having to escape that. Just a very good, sustained sequence of suspense and action in that one that I think, yeah, helps the movie end on a good note, as well as a good cliffhanger for what's coming next. And now we come to the very end with the final reckoning. I'm surprised, you know, with this movie pretty much being the longest in the series, it doesn't really have like a lot of action scenes in it. It really has 3 main ones. And the first one of those is the shootout at St. Matthew's Island. This one I'm going to put in I've seen better just because as far as shootout sequences go, this one just doesn't really have that much emotional resonance for me because Ethan's team, Benji's the only veteran at that point and the rest of them are brand new members of this sort of ragtag IMF team. I'm not really that emotionally invested in those characters surviving, although it was kind of interesting having that one guy, I forget his name, but the one guy from Langley in the original Mission Impossible having a role in this. Them bringing him back, it was a little bit of like a nostalgia bait, but in a good way. Needless to say, though, I think there are more entertaining shootout sequences in this series. The Sevastopol sequence, though, honestly, like, I'm inclined to put this near the top of the truly impossible mission tier. For one thing, the Sevastopol sequence is unlike anything else in the Mission Impossible series. I'm even tempted to call it like a horror movie sequence with how this plays out. You know, it almost feels like you have Ethan Hunt put in the situation that you'd find in a survival horror game where you have this structure that's falling apart around him as he goes in there. It's easing off of this precarious, like, undersea cliff that it's on. The music in there is tense and haunting as he's navigating this environment with a bunch of dead bodies around him and missile torpedoes and all this stuff. Dare I say it's scary and intense, and I relished every second watching that. It was different in the best way possible to where I think it really sold me on just how hopeless the situation is for Ethan in trying to save the world, quite literally here. All of the tension and the stakes made that one of the single best sequences in the series. And then finally, we have the biplane chase. As I've said, all of these movies, pretty much like Mission Impossible 3 onward, have had that one sequence that they've built all of the marketing around, and this is definitely that one for this movie. This one is different because the biplane chase, rather than just being a stunt for the sake of having a stunt in the movie, it's a good little final confrontation between Gabriel and Ethan, and of course the end thereof is very satisfying, but the stunts themselves are just incredible. I talked about Ethan holding on to the side of a plane for Rogue Nation, and I think this one takes the cake, just for the tricks that the plane goes through in order for Gabriel to try to chase off Ethan and make him fall to his death. And yeah, just a very exciting, very fun action sequence that is a great send-off for Ethan as a character. And yeah, that's the tier list. I do think Mission Impossible has a lot more wins with its action sequences than losses, as evidenced by my tier list here. Maybe you guys would feel differently than me, so if you enjoyed this tier list, feel free to go ahead and comment how you feel about these action sequences, what your favorites and least favorites are. And then also, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, for doing so really does help my channel grow, and I will see you all in the next one.